Hi there. Gnosticism and the Qliphot. Hmm. Uh, I suppose I want to do two things in this presentation. One, I want to present a practical application for the study of the Qliphot, or the demonic orders, as they're called. But the other is to, and more importantly, I suppose, is to relate it to Gnosticism as a spiritual path. And you may be surprised to find titles, websites such as Sacred Magic and the Qliphot, and because the Qliphot are considered to be as sacred as anything else that you learn about in the study of Kabbalah, which is a Jewish mystical system going back hundreds of years, possibly to 1000 AD, something like that, I think. Anyway, the point is that what you need to know about the Qliphot really is found in the translation of the word Qliphot, which means shell. And so basically, you have the shells, the Qliphot, and it is said that the reason why they are called shells is because they are empty of the light, life, liberty, and love of the Creator God. And I've represented here the tree of life as a set of 10 onion rings with Keter, the crown, or the light of God, at its center, and Malkut, which is the realm in which we live, the physical realm, at its outer part of the onion. And I won't go into technical reasons why I've shown it in this way, but each of these spheres, which are sort of concentrically arranged, are known as sephira, and as I say, the one in the middle is Keter, the crown, the light of God. Malkut is where we live, the kingdom, known as the kingdom. And outside of the kingdom, outside of the tree of life, there are these chaotically placed spheres called the Qliphot that are empty of the light of God. So the light of God is at the center, at Keter, and it's distilled and distilled and dispersed until you get to Malkut, where it is said that if you could represent Malkut, the kingdom, the sphere in which we live, the physical realm, as a color, it would be like emerald green flecked with gold, and the gold flecks on the color on the green would represent the flecks of Keter, which are still preserved in Malkut. But by the time you get to Malkut, there are only flecks of God left. And we're talking about the Creator God here, and that's significant. I'll come back to that in a minute. And outside, as I said, outside the emerald sphere with its flecks of gold, there is darkness, there is chaos, there is disorder, there is a Qliphot, there is emptiness, and each of these shells is a location of emptiness, as it might be, which is very interesting because it seems like a contradiction in terms that you'd have a sphere of emptiness within emptiness. It does not seem to be logically possible. Anyway, so you've got all these spheres bobbing about in an ocean of emptiness that are themselves empty. And it is said, from a practical, magical point of view, that whilst most people are content to make do with what they find in this physical universe, and yet this universe is mostly empty, or so it seems. So, in fact, people that know about the Qliphot are making use of a so-called empty universe in order to gain knowledge and power over the material world, indeed, as a result of their connection or contact or understanding of this so-called emptiness, which exists outside the tree of life, as represented by my onion rings here. And so the love, light, liberty, and love only occupies a very small amount of the physical universe, or indeed the multiverse, whereas the emptiness of the Qliphot represent everything else that you can contact and find and understand and manipulate and exploit to your advantage. But there is a more spiritual aspect to the study of the Qliphot, because I mentioned earlier that these spheres are spheres of emptiness, floating in an ocean of emptiness outside the tree of life, which is where everything happens, as it were. And it's only an appearance of emptiness, because in actual fact, it is an emptiness which is in fact full. And in fact, each of the spheres of the Qliphot are sort of, well, they have an outer layer of outer layer of nothingness, but inside there is a fullness, which in fact reflects the fullness of the ocean in which the Qliphot is floating. Whereas, and this is in contrast with a physical object, which has physicality represented by the circle here, and inside is the emptiness of the space between the atoms, reflecting the emptiness of the vacuum of space. So indeed, when you get and this is part of the created world, but the Qliphotic world is in fact the Alice in Wonderland opposite of the situation, because instead of emptiness within matter, reflecting the emptiness of the vacuum of space, you have fullness at the center of the Qliphotic element sphere, reflecting the fullness of the ocean in which it floats. And I repeat myself on this because it's quite an important thing, because this sphere, which is sort of like an egg, and the outer eggshell is empty, which means you can penetrate this outer emptiness of the Qliphot and discover the fullness within. And the fullness within gives you understanding and access to the fullness without. So you access the fullness by going into the fullness which is enclosed by the emptiness of the Qliphot, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And in practical terms, or in terms of meditation, this has, you go into the silence, wherein you find the voice of the silence, which speaks for the fullness that is to be found within. As Jesus said, the kingdom of God is to be found within. So the Qliphot are not, is nothing. It has a sorcery side to it, but it also has a transcendental spiritual side to the study of the Qliphot, which should not be, which should not be overlooked in all the sort of, I don't know, hysterical press, as it might be, or the bad rap that the Qliphot actually gets. Indeed, it could be that the Qliphot are in fact a way of individually accessing the fullness of the transcendental God. And the reason why there are so many spheres of the Qliphot is because each one of these spheres is going to be suited to the individual seeker. So if you like, these spheres of the Qliphot are mirrors unto the soul of the seeker. And whichever sphere of the Qliphot that you discover or land on, as it were, or penetrate, that is going to reflect what you need to penetrate in order to discover the transcendental God or the kingdom within. So I hope that I've shown that the study of the Qliphot is in fact something which is not to be feared, but is something to be embraced as perhaps a practical way of discovering your soul consciousness, or experiencing soul consciousness, as well as discovering the fullness of the transcendental God. Now, a lot of people will say to me, well, why has this become linked with sorcery and love, luck, and loot, and madness, and occult demonology, and all the strange and mad things that happen with so-called left-hand path occultism? And I think um, it's because the Qliphot also are prone to give you challenges. They are prone to give you banana skins to fall over. And in fact, the banana skins and the challenges and the negative energy, the might of the repulsing energy, or the energy that pushes you away from entry, is in fact part of the process of entry. If that makes any sense. So part of it is that the things you have to overcome within yourself represent the very things that will enable you to penetrate the mysteries that are hidden from you. And to go back to the original statement, most people are perfectly happy to work with what they can find in the universe. But if I was to tell you that the emptiness that comprises most of the universe is in fact the very fullness which only a few people actually discover by associating themselves with the science and art of contacting and making sense of the Qlipotic shells. Um, but of course, I realize that from the point of view of somebody who's really into the worship of the Creator God, the Qlipotic shells will be something of an alarming, would represent an alarming element, an element to be feared, because of course, there's no part of the Creator God left by the time you get to the Qlipotic shells. And so from that point of view, point of view of the Creator God, the Qlipotic shells are not something that you want your errant children to go and find, because these shells could in fact be the sort of holes in the cheese through which you have to fall in order to find the transcendental God, which of course the Creator God does not want you to find. But I realize also that the Qliphot and dealing with the Qliphot has its dangers, and has its unfortunate consequences for the immature, and for the shallow person who wishes for love, luck, and loot, but who also wishes for thrill, as a thrill seeker. And you'll find thrills plenty in the Qliphot, all right. And you'll find chills, and you'll find a lot of heartbreak and heartache, and a lot of insanity as well, and things which really don't make any sense at all, and which fill you full of fear. But remember that fear is one of the things which keeps us chained to the demiurge and keeps us chained to the lower worlds. It's the fear of flying, and the fear of becoming more than we are, by exploring what appears to be less than what we are. So the Qliphot, it appears to be less than the universe, of which we are sensible, of which we are aware normally, and that is something which you have to sort of bear in mind. It appears to be less, but in fact it is more. But on the other hand, you do have to enter into a sort of Alice in Wonderland logic here, and which is incredibly dangerous to do, because of course, you've also got to get up and go and put the kettle on and have a cup of tea, and go and mow the yard, and look after and wash the diapers and look after your kids, and look after your mortgage and all this, because you're still in this world. You can't use the Qliphot as a way of escaping this world, wherein of course half the problems lie. People use the Qliphot as a way of escape, and then it becomes a sort of drug like heroin, which means you become more and more dysfunctional and unable to cope with this world as it is, as we find it. And I think possibly that's the reason why the Qliphot is feared so much. But I think, that's not the Qliphot's fault, as it were. That's your fault. You're not approaching this whole subject in a mature way. And when you begin to see that it's all part of the Gnostic way and of Gnostic spirituality, then I think the Qliphot starts to become more sensible as a path. Both in terms, I use the word sensible in terms of rational, and in terms of something which you can actually detect and become aware of by changing the way that you detect things. By changing your telescope, for example, or your microscope, you can become more aware, more sensitive to the things that are there that normally you cannot see. You do have to have your psychic telescope and microscope readjusted so that you can see the things that people say are not there. If you see. So all I've done in this video really is kind of presented the case for exploring the Qliphot, if you want to. And I say that if you want to because I think a lot of people don't actually want to, really, but they feel they have to in order to be kind of hip, or be kind of, because it's kind of like, well, I want to be naughty and upset my parents or the religion of my parents. And that's really, really the wrong attitude to take with you into this fascinating study. And if that is your attitude, your immature attitude, then it's best you stay within the Sephira of light, because you're not ready to jump off into the so-called emptiness of space in order to find the fullness of spirit.